Together, we've built this ministry to help churches on a budget, lead better worship. And one of the biggest part of that is finding volunteers. Finding volunteers, keeping volunteers happy. And it's not just volunteers. We're also going to deal with some staff issues that come up. But I wanted to start out with volunteers because most small churches, they really don't have the option to have any staff. It's going to be all volunteers. I mean, some churches, the pastor doesn't even get paid. You have what's called a bivocational preacher. Well, when you're dealing with worship, you're dealing with musicians. That happens far more often than having staff. So I really wanted to start there. And the biggest obstacle that I find is finding volunteers, because a lot of what happens is people will see, if you've got volunteers that are up there, you've got your entire praise band filled every single week, nobody's going to see that there's a need for more volunteers. And when you get somebody that's out, somebody that's on vacation, somebody that's sick, then there's the hole on stage, and the first thing that every worship leader thinks is, well, how am I going to fill this hole? And one of the things that I actually like to recommend, and I believe I've talked about this with budget worship leaders, is let that hole be there. The reason for that being, if there's a hole and somebody sees that there's no one there filling that need, well, if somebody in the congregation's got that talent, they can say, hey, look, here's an opportunity I might have to volunteer. Here's how I may be able to help serve this church. And that fixes more than one problem. It relieves the stress on the worship leader when you don't have the position filled, and it relieves the stress on the team when somebody else volunteers. What do you think about that, Matt?
I fully agree with that, and I'll also take it one step further. Worship leaders. One thing that a lot of worship leaders struggle with is the concept of dynamic change on the stage. That hole serves exactly the purpose that Rob was talking about, but it also does something else. Sometimes you get in a rut and you don't even realize that you're playing the same songs, whether they're different songs or not. They just sound the same. They feel the same because your ears get comfortable. It happens. It's not a fault. It's just things happen. You listen to similar things. Now, I know praise worship leaders really strive hard to change things up. But one of the things I've tried to push at multiple times is use the hole as a reason to create a dynamic shift for 1 week. By that, I mean, do an acoustic set. Do something different. Bring a cajon player in instead of a drummer. Do that kind of thing. You might be surprised at the reaction you get from the people. Hey, I like that. That was neat this week. We did something different. Doesn't mean you're doing it every week, but it's just a nice twist to come in. Like, let's be honest. I don't remember many people that have ever said, I hate campfire music. You know what I mean?
That's good.
So it's just a neat way of just spinning it up every couple of weeks, every few weeks. But you're back to the original problem. You can use it to your advantage, but you still have a hole to fill. So you're back to the problem of the volunteers.
And the biggest thing with volunteers is once you get a volunteer, you've got to keep that volunteer happy. And the best way to do that, and this is, I'm gonna go so far as to say that this is the management end of a worship leader's biggest thing is taking care of their volunteers, taking care of their people. Because people will never care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if you have somebody that thinks, or they get used every single week, they start feeling like they're unappreciated, and you can tell them they're appreciated all you want, it doesn't really set in. They're not going to pay attention to what you tell them. They're going to pay attention to what they see, and even more than that, what they feel.
We don't want people feeling stuff anymore. But the word that we're not saying, that we need to say, burnout. That's where we need to avoid that. And that's exactly where he's getting with that. This applies to your tech team, your broadcast team, your musicians. It applies to your staff. Let's be realistic. If you've got 3 people on staff and they can't miss a week, they're going to get burned out. But anyway.
And burnout is especially dangerous for musicians because once a musician gets burned out, they start to lose their passion for it.
Yes.
And there's nothing that kills a musician volunteering like getting burned out and not feeling like picking up their instrument because they're so burned out.
Yeah, and let's be real, but not picking up your instrument is not just a live thing, it's a practice thing. And if you're not practicing, you're not getting better, you're losing your drive while you are a musician. Doesn't mean you're gonna just keel over and I'm never touching my guitar again, but it's hard enough to get people as it is. You definitely don't want somebody that's stepped out of the limelight for a little bit. Now they're going to struggle to get back in, and you may not get them anyway. But also, a quick point I'd like to make is related to the tech side. He's talking specifically to the music side, but the tech side is actually a little harder in this instance that we're talking about. Why is that? Well, simply put, complication. Tech side, there's a lot of people who can play guitar. Not everybody can play it great. Not everybody can, is accomplished, but a lot of people can play chords on a guitar and get better with a praise band. For whatever reason, people are terrified of soundboards, broadcast cameras, things like that. They just think it's this technology just mess. They're like, I don't want to do that. I can't tell you how many times people have come up and watched me run a board, and they're like, oh, that's cool. And I'm like, man, we need people. Are you interested? No. Oh, no. I don't want any part of that. I'm like, it's not that hard. It's one channel times 32. Once you realize little simple fundamental things, it's not that hard. But convincing a volunteer of that who understands that they only have so much time in the week they can volunteer, it's a fruitless battle. At least with musicianship, you have people who like playing the instrument. You have people who just like music. Everybody likes music. So that's a little easier of a sell, but it's still not easy. It's still hard. But yeah, back to the point of burnout. So what are some ways we can attack burnout and prevent it from happening in your idea, as well as, like, what have you experienced personally?
The biggest way to avoid, and I can't believe I'm not burned out, because I can't think of a single Sunday in the last 3 years that I haven't been, or at least the last 2 years that I haven't been leading worship. I haven't sat in a congregation with my wife in 2 years because I'm always up on the stage, or I'm always behind the drum kit, or playing a guitar.
This is another issue.
And that brings up a whole different issue. Is you want to make sure that volunteers are, or your staff even, it doesn't matter if you're a paid musician or if you're a volunteer, you've got to have some downtime. You've got other responsibilities. If you've got a family, then you've got your family's emotional needs that you need to be thinking about and supporting. So you can't expect your team to just shut down from their families and be up there on stage every week, or be behind the soundboard every week.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that they've got time with their families, and that's so important. And that's another thing that causes burnout, because that causes relationship stress at home. That causes them to come in a bad mood, with bad attitudes, and that just poisons everybody. So you really gotta focus on that. The best thing to do to avoid burnout: schedule downtime. If you don't have the people, okay, rearrange your set. Like Matt said, do an acoustic set. 2 weeks ago I did a set with the choir. It was just me, the choir, and my acoustic guitar. And it was an absolutely amazing worship experience, and it was something that I'm not used to doing, because I'm used to playing either with a full band or I'm playing drums behind the choir. And to get out there and to sing at Calvary with a choir behind me and an acoustic guitar, it was so powerful because of its simplicity. And what really mattered wasn't what was going on around me. What mattered is that Jesus is getting worship. Jesus is getting the praise. He's getting the glory. I couldn't believe I got to be a part of that. It was just such a powerful experience. And we have multiple generations in my church, and most of the older generation, there's a bunch of them that absolutely love the new stuff that we're doing, but most of them they wax nostalgic about the hymns.
Yeah.
And that's an argument you're going to hear everywhere. We're not playing enough hymns, we're not doing enough hymns. Well, one of the things that did, that allowed me to do hymns. Like I did Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone, which spoke to everybody because it's Amazing Grace. Everybody knows that. It's a little bit different, a little bit more upbeat, but it's still an amazing song. Did At Calvary. That's one of the most well-known hymns that there are, and everybody engaged. I'm sitting there looking out across the congregation, and everybody is up and engaging, and I'm feeling the Holy Spirit doing His work, and it was just an amazing experience. Why? Because my sound tech was out, my sound tech was there that day. That was a whole nother fiasco. My drummer was out, it wasn't going to be an all choir week, so I wasn't able to play drums. One of my guitar players was out, and one of my singers was out. The other singer said, well, you know what, you're going to lead this one. Well, I'm just going to kind of step. And I said, who wants to come up there and sing with me? And I got, well, you know what, why don't you just handle this one on your own? absolutely fine with me. So you know what happened? The rest of my team that was there, they got a week. They were able to sit with their families. They were able to just enjoy worshiping with the body. And that's something that worship leaders everywhere struggle with, is we don't get to be in the congregation and the worship happening around us. So we need to make sure that even we schedule ourselves off time so that we're not burning ourselves out. But we also need to make sure that we're scheduling our team off time so that they can go out into the congregation. And you know, I think one of the reasons that the worship was so powerful that day was because parts of the worship team were out there in the congregation and everybody was feeding off of them being in the midst of the crowd. It was just an absolutely beautiful thing.
A similar experience I had on a completely different scale though. Years ago in one of the churches that I've helped with in a praise team scenario, we actually went up to the mountains to do a praise retreat, whatever you want to call it. To get away, you know, sabbatical type thing. Well, while we were up there, we went into Cades Cove, Tennessee. Many of you probably have been there or know about it. And very peaceful place, but it's very primitive. There's not a lot of electricity. Well, we went into a primitive Baptist church there, and we literally had us, which was probably 7 or 8 of us at least, and then we had a bunch of people that were there visiting, and we just sat down and started praising. We had a djembe with us, we had a guitar with us, and we just sat there and started singing and praising, and it was fun. We just did it very directly for a reason. But what we realized was the people started coming in and singing with us. And it was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever personally been involved in, is because we took out, like you said, you kept it simple. We took out all the complications, and we just made it about us and God. All that to say this: you have to get people taken care of in your church. The people are everybody. The people are staff, they're volunteers, they're, some people I wouldn't even qualify as a volunteer. They're just servants. You know, they're just there to help, you know, set up chairs, break down chairs. Those people are vital to a church. And if you just take advantage of them, they won't be there again. And then all of a sudden you've got a new problem. But what we're specifically referencing is the musician hole, because somebody is burned out, because they haven't taken vacation, or because your sound tech is getting a little snippy with everybody. I have been there. I have been the snippy one.
No.
Yes. Now, sound techs are naturally snippy, so don't mistake the two. You have to understand when they get really snippy. Anyway, that's just a hidden joke between musicians and sound techs. But in a nutshell, this episode is about people. Who are the people? Everyone praises God. Everyone's supposed to praise God, or all believers should. The Bible specifically says, let everyone praise the Lord. So who are the people? It's everybody in your church. Take care of people. Treat them with kindness. Treat them with respect. Learn lessons by the way people act. If you've got somebody that's a little harder to work with in certain situations, learn how to work with them on their terms. It doesn't take much for people who give everything they have day in and day out to quickly not have anything left. And we've all been there. Like you said, when you're up there every week, you get surprised some days. You're like, how am I still doing this? If this was a secular job, I would have quit.
I've asked myself that many, many times.
Yeah, so you have to basically remind yourself that you love the Lord, you're there for Him, you're there for your relationship, but you can't neglect your family. You can't neglect your friends. You have to take care of these things. But fundamentally, what we wanted to hit on was, and we'll just take just a minute on this, how do we get more people to help? So, Rob, you handle it from the musician side, and I'm going to talk about the tech side, because they are two very different things.
Well, the best thing that being a part of a small church, we have average attendance of about 180 people a week. I know everybody at that church. I know who's got the talents. I know who's not using their talents and why they're not using their talents, because I've gone to them and asked, hey, why don't you join us? Why don't you come join us? And that's the biggest thing. Just have the conversation with them. The biggest way to get volunteers is to make it personal. You come up to somebody and you have somebody new that walks into your church. Well, my church, we've got several different, a blend of people that dress up for church. You've got people that come in jeans shorts and t-shirts. And I tend to be more of the latter. I try to be a little more cognizant of that when I'm up on stage, because I don't want the focus on me. I want the focus on him. So I try to not do anything that stands out. But you see somebody come in wearing a Zildjian t-shirt, or wearing a Fender t-shirt, or wearing a Gibson shirt,
There's your sign.
There's a sign right there. That's probably a musician, and if they're a musician, then they probably want a way to serve that involves the music, because that's where musicians are odd creatures. We all are.
Yeah.
We're people that the music isn't just a part of who we are. The music becomes who we are. And I walked away from music for a very long. I took about probably about a 7-year break where I didn't do anything musical at all, and it changed my life. And then when I finally rediscovered music, when it came back in my life, and my wife will tell you this, she's like, I lost my husband because I'm married to music now, and
I can't argue with that. And my wife would probably say something very similar.
And it's not that I want to focus more on my music. It's that it consumes your life. When it takes that much of your life, then you've got to be able to put that on a shelf and say, okay, this time I'm leaving music out of this. I'm just going to spend time with my wife. I'm just going to play with my kids. Or I'm going to go see my friends. And it's so hard because it's like my head's a radio. It doesn't ever shut off. There's always music in my head if there's not music in there.
It's like the A on the
Yeah.
I'm the same way.
And if there's not music playing in my house, I'm losing my mind. And my wife has gotten to the point where she's honestly like, I don't like music anymore. I hate music. Well, it's not that she hates music. It's just it becomes such a big part of your life. And when you do this, like if this is your vocation, if this is your job, you've got to look at it as being like a work-life balance. So when you're dealing with volunteers, you can't expect them to not have that kind of work-life balance, especially if they're not full-time musicians. If they have 9-to-5 jobs or they're working 50 hours a week, and then they've got to go home and they've got to learn these songs so that they can play them next week or the same week, and they've got wives and kids to deal with, they've got houses that they've got to do maintenance on, they're gonna eventually have to give up something. And chances are that the music ministry is probably the easiest one to drop. So you really, it's
not just a chance. It's the one that gets dropped. You actually hit on a good point. I'd like to delve into for a second. It's the full-time musician aspect of it. Now, I'm not talking specifically full-time, but paid versus unpaid volunteering. This applies to both tech and musician side. I'm not going to pretend to preach to churches to tell them whether they should or should not pay. That is up to each individual staff, each individual church. What my experience has shown me is the volunteering side of it, when you expect people to volunteer, volunteering turns into an optional consideration week to week. Not always, but I'm trying to be careful how I word this. When you offer some pay, even if it's not much, if you offer something, that contributes to an enticement to be faithful. Is it required? Should we have to? No, I'm not going to go into that, but my point is, in my experience, you should try, in my opinion as well, you should try to at least pay something to entice that faithfulness week in and week out. Because if you make it purely volunteer, purely optional, it's optional. You know, if they're not feeling real good one week, guess what? Even if they're not sick, they're just not feeling great. If they're needing to do a vacation, well, it's not a job, it's volunteering, right?
Right.
So that's where it becomes an issue. So that was just a point. I didn't want to preach on a soapbox about it, but be cognizant of the people that you pay and don't pay. You'd be surprised which ones are more crucial to your weekly experience. It surprised me once I've seen it from the other thing. And the flip side of that, and to kind of build on what he was talking about from the musician side, the AV side can be a little trickier. The problem with AV and tech is, at least for one or two people, it usually involves being a bigger amount of time involvement than the musician side. It's not to take away from the musician side, because I'm a musician as well. It's when you're tech, you've got to be there earlier, you got to be there later, you got to turn it on, turn it off, you got to prep, you got to do extra things that musicians typically either don't have to do or they can do on their own. What that translates to is people see this. They see your tech, their extra hours, and it's in their head whether they want it to be or not, and they're like, ooh, I don't want to do that. That's too much time. So one thing you have to consider from a budgeting perspective, and back to our key point on this, is you might need one person that kind of manages it all, but have teams under them or with them that execute the actual week in and week out worship services. The reason behind that is because if you've got 10 people trying to make decisions on what tech to buy, how to run the service week in and week out, you're going to get chaos. We all know that. But if you've got one or two key people that are like, you have your praise leader, you have your tech leader, that make the key decisions with input from the team, and then they just basically tell people what they need to be doing and making sure it's working, not necessarily like a boss, but more like just a guidance type thing. What you'll realize is the main tech is not burned out as much, and the volunteers are not burned out as much because they can rotate and do different tasks and things like that. This is something that crucial that gets missed with a lot of churches and a lot of organizations is you've got to allow them the ability to rotate so that they can take time off again to be with their family or to do things. So just wanted to hit on that, but that's where the musicianship side and the tech side kind of go their own way, is the amount of effort involved. Not that music doesn't involve the same amount of effort, it's effort on your own time.
Well, I mean, really, musicians are not going to be on the stage at every single thing that the church does. Every single thing that the church does requires the sound tech.
Yeah, and it's not just the sound tech. I mean, you've got video people, cameras, they might need to be there to stream it. You've got social media people that might need to be there for that. Churches forget their tech teams, and it's an easy thing to do. So if you're in a position to make these decisions, I would just say be aware of your tech teams and offer to help when you can. It could be as simple as just picking something up and move it and putting it down. I mean, I make that joke all the time. I pick stuff up, I put it down. You know what I mean? That's all it takes. We have some of the best servant-hearted people in our church, and I'm sure you do as well.
Absolutely.
And all they do is they come up and set chairs up, break chairs down. They come up and help clean up cabling or something like that. That's all it takes to keep the burnout at bay. But in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about here is people. How do you keep good people? How do you get good people? How do you keep good people from burning out? I think that pretty much sums it up is just think of other people like yourself, the golden rule, so to speak. Think about, if I was in that position, what would I like to see? What would keep me from getting burned out? I've been on the flip side, on the musician side of the stage, so I understand what their concerns are. Rob's been on the side of the tech, my side of the stage. He understands my concerns, but not everybody gets that visibility.
And as far as paid versus volunteer, I live on both sides of that as well.
Yeah.
One place that I play, I get paid, and it's not a lot, but you know what? It really wasn't the point of it anyway.
Yeah.
It took me It took me a couple of weeks when the worship leader said to me, "Hey, we'd like to pay you." It took me a couple of weeks of thought and prayer before I finally decided, you know what? It's okay. And what it really amounted to was playing on an acoustic drum set, which I hadn't done in years. I started chewing through drumsticks left and right, and I was like, I need to replace some drumsticks. And that's what it's all about. You take care of the things like, hey, let's give you enough so you can get your new sets of drumsticks every week because we know you're going to break yours. The gas that goes in your car, guitar strings, getting your guitar set up. I have a luthier. I have my own personal luthier, and I'm gonna try and get him in here on this show because he's an amazing worship leader. He's an amazing luthier, and he sets my guitars up for me. I pay him to do that because it's a skill that he has that I don't possess currently, and he said he'd teach me how to do it. But that's learning how to work on your own stuff. That's for another episode. But the point is, this kind of service takes money.
Yes.
And not only that, I always looked at it this way: you don't get paid to show up and worship on Sunday. If you are getting paid, you're getting paid for the countless hours of practice time that you're putting in when you could be spending more time, doing other things with your family. When you have to stay up late or get up early so you can go through the songs again just to get these songs in your head, because what it really amounts to is we want to lead worship with excellence.
Yes.
And in order to keep that excellence, it requires a lot of work. And the work, that's our service. That's what when you're paying your team, that's what you're paying them for, is the work that they put into it, not for showing up getting paid to worship on Sunday. So let's get that out there right now.
Well, and here's another thought too. Doesn't matter how much you get paid, but think about getting paid like this for the sound tech, for the musician who's giving up their time with their family. Maybe not all of it, but a significant chunk of it. That money could be spent very wisely, and I'm just fully transparent. This is how I use mine sometimes, other than guitar strings and things like that. I will take my family on day trips, go on vacations, as a reward for letting me serve God more in this capacity. I even try to get my kids to to help and plug in and stuff like this. But that pay, like I said, I mean, we're not pushing that you should do it. We're just saying here's some ideas, if you're not doing it, of how it can really benefit your service better. And why is this important? Because obviously the people aspect, but from a budgeting aspect, we are budget worship. This is a key thing because you need to budget that money. That is a key part of budgeting for a worship service. It's not just about the sound system. It's not just about the guitars, the drums, the lighting, those kind of things. The people are part of your budget, both from paying them potentially or from their effort and time. So how do you make your worship service better on a budget? Well, one, spend the money wisely when you deal with people. Anyway, in a nutshell, I think that's, from my perspective anyway, we just wanted to hit on the whole people aspect. Anything else you'd like to?
Oh, absolutely. I could go on about this all night.
Yeah, feel free.
One of the things that you can really do to show that your team, and that's the biggest thing, you show your team that you appreciate them. You don't just tell them. I mean, yeah, you tell them, but you really need to back that up with action. Take one of your musicians out, for coffee sometime. Talk to them. Ask them, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? How can I pray for you? And just that, chances are they've got something going on in their lives. I mean, everybody does, right? Especially in this crazy world that we live in. Everybody's got issues in their lives, and they've got problems. Talk to them one-on-one. Hey, how are you doing? Let's go grab some lunch. How are you doing? What's going on in your life? Is there anything that I need to be praying for you over? Is there anything that you need help with? Is there anything that I can get some people in the congregation together to go help you with? Because you're giving up so much of your time that you don't have these things to do, or you don't have the time to do these things. Is there anything we can help you with? Show them that you care by loving on them. Take your team out for something. Go, maybe a barbecue at your house. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant. Take your team out. Let them, get some time together to unwind when it's not on stage and they're not under pressure.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. Your team, your worship team, is almost like your own little small group.
It is. And a lot of people miss that point in a church. D group, small group, life group, plenty of names for the same thing. Small, compact groups, learning about fellowshipping, things like that. The musicians, I fully agree with that, and the tech team, they become their own D groups. They might not even be together. They might be a tech D group and whatever, but the point is, these people literally live and work together for a little while. I mean, they're there at the same hours, they're doing it, so use that to your advantage. But to one of the points you made, I'll say this. When's the last time your church had a get-together, a fellowship? Let's say a barbecue, dinner, whatever, like that. Where were you musicians? Where was your praise leader? Where was your tech team? Probably setting up or breaking down for the program that you have with your thing. Don't get me started on programs and eating. I'm not going there. But you get the point. These people dedicate more than just the time itself. They dedicate the extra time of getting equipment there, loading it, unloading it. The tech team especially, they have to stay after and shut it down and wrap cables up and move things out because your daycare has to use something or because something else is going on in the church. These are hidden costs that you don't take into consideration. But to your point, fellowship with them, because a lot of the times the fellowship that other people in the church get, you don't even realize it. They're not there because they're doing other stuff. So I like that point.
And yeah, like in my church, the head of my sound team is my small group leader. Excuse me. He is my small group leader. So we have our Wednesday night practices, and then we have a run through on Sunday mornings. Well, when the run through on Sunday mornings is over, that's when the worship team, they get to go to the small group class or the small group classes, and my sound tech goes and runs the small group class that he's in charge of. Well, that's when the choir pianist and the choir leader or the choir director meet in the choir room and start practicing for the songs that they're going to be doing. So I went probably a year without ever stepping foot in my own small group class because I was busy serving with the choir leader, the choir director, and the piano player and the bass player. We didn't get to go to these small groups. We didn't get to be a part of a small group, even though I had a small group, just because that's the time I was serving there. And you've got to understand what your team is really giving up, and you've got to make it. You've got to make it known how much that's appreciated. If you got to make it to the point where they know that it's not all for nothing. It's you've got to let them see where their efforts are going and how their efforts affect the congregation. And it really instills a sense of pride in your team.
It does.
And that's a very, very important aspect of worship leadership.
I actually fell into the same boat as well, and it's been longer than that, a lot longer than that. The problem in my scenario was tech doesn't stop working because Sunday school starts. You know, it doesn't take a break. So Sunday schools now have TVs in them. You got Wi-Fi, people have to do that. So for your tech who also possibly does networking, does audio-visual still, obviously, a lot of times you won't even realize it, but they'll be in a small group and they'll get called out because the daycare TV's not working, the speaker's not working, or we need the Wi-Fi and we can't. We're trying to stream Right Now Media or something like that. These are wonderful things, but tech doesn't take a break. The same way setup and breakdown doesn't take a break. I can't tell you how many times people, myself included, miss something, not because we wanted to miss it, but because set up tables and chairs, because a lot of times your musicians and your tech are also your servant people that set up and break down for special events and things like that. So everybody goes and does the thing in the sanctuary, but hey, we need tables set up. You know what I mean? It's so easy to just realize that things happen and you don't know how until you actually help or you look and you're like, oh my God, the same 3 people are doing 80% of the stuff in the church. That's where the burnout happens. That's where you've got to be careful and help them and try to, like you said, get to know them better, see what's going on in their life, because they're just pouring in. At some point, that cup's empty. You got to refill it. So I fully agree with that.
And this isn't even just limited to the worship team or the tech team. I mean, this is church wide. This is volunteers and staff in all different parts of the church, because you have, like in my church, everything is done by volunteers. Grass cutting, detail.
I
mean, all of it. There's no staff outside of the pastor in my church, and it's all done because people have servants' hearts. Well, we need to make sure that those servants' hearts are taken care of.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect your pastor to go 24/7 and be bivocational and never take a vacation, but yet the expectation is there a lot of times that that's what your praise team and that's what your choirs usually get a little bit of a break. We're not going to go there because don't get me started on choirs, but choirs usually get it a little better because they have a very set, consistent practice time and they have a very set worship time, and they don't have to do the setup and breakdown. They come and sing and they're done. So yeah, choirs, I get burnout's a lot less of an issue there than anywhere else. But that being said, one other thing that I wanted to hit on before we wrap this up is consistency. That's something that a lot of people don't talk about. It just doesn't really come up as much. One of the things you can do to prevent burnout and to help your teams is consistent practice times, consistency in how you do things. What that does is it takes the stress off of things. You don't have to worry about the dynamics changing so drastically week to week that, oh, what are we going to do this week? You know, how do we adapt this week? That's not saying that churches can't adapt, but if your entire presence on a worship service is literally seat of the pants from A to Z every Sunday, what do you think that does to the people who have to prepare for that every Sunday? So that's just a quick little hit.
And preparation. Talking about preparation. If you're in charge of songs, get the songs out early. Give your team enough time to get comfortable with the songs so that they're not stressing about it 3 days, the day before practice.
Well, and I'll be careful with that because I have heard both sides of that equation, and we even deal with it here. There are some praise leaders who like to match what the praise songs that they choose to what is being preached. Okay, I get it. I'm a sound tech. I'm not a praise leader. I wasn't called to that ministry, so I get it. To each their own. The Holy Spirit works in different ways. But I don't want to make it like you have to do this. You can be adaptive to the Holy Spirit. Where I believe that these pain points come in is when the entire set is set to that every week and you're waiting until literally an hour before practice time to learn it. If you can, get 2 of the songs out. Just make little subtle changes to your what's the word I'm looking for? Your routine, so to speak. Just little subtle changes to say, okay, I'm going to work to do this better or this better. This applies to the tech team too. It's the same thing. The group that I work with and they help me out is to make their jobs as easy as possible. I want to automate stuff. I want to give them the information they need. Hey, this week we got a baptism. Well, yeah, I could wait until 5 minutes before the service, but when did I find out? You know what I mean? They need to know so they can put a microphone over there. It's simple little things like that that you constantly have to be thinking about. But that's a fair point.
There are the two sides of that coin, and you're absolutely right. But I will say this: if you can get the songs out, get them out as early as possible, because that pulls so much stress off your team, and that having to learn songs, especially for like somebody who me, I play by ear. I don't read music at all.
Yeah.
Having to learn 4 songs between Thursday and Sunday puts me under just such a load of stress, and it means when I come home from work, I eat my dinner, I get my shower, I eat my dinner, and then I'm in front of a TV with a guitar playing along with these songs on YouTube.
I've been there many times.
Because I've got to learn the songs for the weekend, and it is stressful.
Well, tell me this, your opinion. I'll tell you how I feel, and you tell me if you agree or disagree. I would rather have, let's say it's a 3-song set with a 4-song invitation. That's kind of a standard that a lot of people use. Mm-hmm. I would rather have 2 songs in the set and the invitation, and a 3rd song that might change early, than have 4 songs late.
Absolutely.
And that's as a musician speaking.
Even that takes so much stress off.
Yeah, even if that 3rd one you know is going to change, or you know there's a 50-50 that it's going to change, 2 of them probably aren't. So this is not aimed at anybody, because this is a problem many churches face. It's just as musicians, we're reaching out, and this is part of the people equation that we're talking about, is that small bit of stress, medium bit of stress, whatever it equates to, it builds, and it eats away at you, and it eats away at you. And just imagine that job. A lot of ministerial staff don't really know this feeling. They have their own issues. I'm not called to that. But in the secular world, if you go to a job that you love, but there's that one thing, it will chip away at you, and it will chip away at you, and it will chip away at you. And you don't want that in a servant role type scenario.
Like with my church, one of the things that happens with my church, and it would stress me out, but it's been like this for so long that kind of got the stress away from me, is I don't ever know what the invitation's going to be until at least halfway through the service. Really? Because the invitation is going to be something that goes along with the message that was just preached. So I'm finding out when I'm up in the sound room running the cameras what I'm going to have to rush downstairs and into the pit to go play on drums.
Well, and here's a fun tidbit. You got to think back before contemporary services. What did it used to be? It used to be the pianist would have like 8 pieces of music that they had, and depending on what he preached, okay, we're doing Amazing Grace this week, and they'd flip through it, and it's them, or it's 1 or 2 people. Now that you have contemporary and you've got an actual rock band, for lack of a better term, it's a lot harder, but the mentality hasn't changed. Oh, we'll just adapt on the fly. Well, you can I? Because as a guitarist and a bass player myself, the dynamics of the song that you're flat on are going to be flat, because you didn't practice the song. You didn't get to play it. So I fully agree with that. I don't like that scenario, but I do understand being flexible to the will of the Spirit. But come in with 3 or 4 options at least.
And the argument to that is the Holy Spirit can work just as much in your preparation as if you're preparing early as if you're waiting to the last second.
Yeah, it's almost like, I'm not saying you're doing this, but it is almost like you're hamstringing the Holy Spirit by saying, well, I'm going to do it on the fly, and you need to, I'm reacting to you, and to your point, the Holy Spirit's like, well, I could have fixed it then too. But anyway, we're not going to get into that. That could bring up some painful conversations. We were talking about churches, so. But I think in a nutshell, I think we're getting around the point of people matter.
Take care of your people.
Take care of your people. Think of them not primarily, but at least secondarily as part of your budgeting. Money-wise, yes, but I'm talking about they're a resource. You can exhaust a resource as a person just as easily as you can exhaust a resource like money. If you aren't paying attention, your volunteer-based church may have just gotten a lot more volunteer-based. Mm-hmm. So that's my nutshell wrapped up. You got anything else? Yeah, come on.
Just minor is you want to make sure that your team knows that you care about them for more than what they do.
Yeah, this is
for
fair.
More than what they provide, for more than the service that they provide, and that doesn't just go for musicians. That goes for everybody who serves in the church. But You want to make sure that they understand that you care about them as a person more than you care about them as a guitar player or a sound tech or
Yeah,
a
they're
drummer.
not just a resource.
They're not a resource. That they're a person and they're a brother or sister in Christ, and we have to make sure that they're known as that above and beyond just being a
That's a fair
musician
point.
or a tech leader.
Yeah, you have to think about a musician or a tech or anybody or just the guy or woman who sets up tables and chairs before you think about what they're doing or how they're doing it. Think of them like a member of your congregation. Are they hurting? Are they going through something that you have no idea about first? And I think that's a valid point. Too many of us just get caught up in the fact that we are a band and it's our job. So I like that. I think that's a good note to finish on too. Is it's the people equation. The answer to it is they are people. Don't ever forget that they are people first. You got anything else?
No, that covers it.
Well, thank y'all for taking the time this episode. We'll get back with another one soon. We're still trying to figure out some more order, but I think we're getting a groove on this. We're enjoying doing this. Again, reach out, give us some feedback. Budgetworship.com, budgetworshipleaders.com. Comments on the YouTube, Facebook. Let us know how you feel. We appreciate it, and y'all have a great week.
We'll see you.